Hey everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome to Wedding Week. Today we are discussing Meghan Markle's wedding drama because it's one of those big turning points in the history of the saga of Meghan and Harry and their reputation that had a lot of people begin to sour on them. When asked, many people cite the wedding drama as one of the first moments they questioned Meghan Markle, Harry, or their character. So, is it old news? Yes. Yes, it is. But that means it's history. And aside from that, it is one of those most significant moments when it comes to people's general like or dislike of Meghan Markle. So for people who still do not understand why Harry and the Meg are not viewed favorably by the public or are disliked in general at times or by some, the wedding probably falls into the top 3 most important things to learn about if you still don't understand why people dislike this couple. But what exactly was the wedding drama? Well, the list is huge, but we could categorize it into 5 main issues. The first being the Meghan Markle family drama. If you were unaware, Meghan Markle only had one family member present at her wedding to Prince Harry, which was her mother, Doria. And the drama that preceded the week before the wedding was a lot. In April and May, there were a bunch of pictures of Thomas Markle like this, published with rather innocent, some may say heartwarming captions like father of the bride preparing for the wedding. He was doing things like exercising or reading up on British history or tourism. It was this like good dad type of stuff. But it was widely reported that Meghan Markle was quite unhappy with these pictures circulating. And on May 13th, Daily Mail published evidence that it was all set up. They showed security footage from one of the locations of Thomas Markle arriving with and coordinating with a photographer, who then sold the pictures for hundreds of thousands of dollars, one estimate cited. It's not clear whether Thomas benefited financially from this or if it was just the photographer, but who knows, it doesn't really matter. The next day after this story broke, Samantha Markle went onto TV on an interview and said that it was all her idea and that she just wanted people to see him in a positive light before the wedding. And immediately following, Thomas Markle announced that he would not attend the wedding in light of this. He didn't want to embarrass anybody, and he also revealed that he had had a heart attack the week prior. Kensington Palace released a statement requesting understanding and respect at this time, which was deeply personal for Miss Markle. I thought it was a bit odd that they didn't just say for all parties involved, because it was a deeply personal moment for everybody, I think. But I mean, I suppose, I don't know. It just seemed like they were trying to calm things down, but we know now that Harry and Meghan demanded certain statements to be made at various points. Sometimes Meghan demanded Harry to make a statement, sometimes Harry and Meghan demanded the palace make a statement. So the fact that this statement wasn't quite as balanced as is usual for the palace makes me think this was probably a statement that Harry and or Meghan demanded be made. Following that, on a Tuesday, Samantha announced that Thomas had suffered a heart attack, but it was unclear if it was the same one that he had previously mentioned or if he had suffered a second one. She says that he is quite depressed for the events that had followed involving the media, and it was reported that Meghan and Thomas spoke, and at that point, Thomas changed his mind and said that he would attend. But by the next day, he said he can't attend due to the need for heart surgery, and later that day, it was announced that he was out of surgery and had a long road ahead of recovery. The following day, Meghan Markle put out a statement saying that she loves her father, she cares for Thomas, and she hopes that he gets the space he needs to concentrate on his health, seemingly putting an end to the drama. On Friday, the following day, it was announced that King Charles will be the one to walk her down the aisle. It was later revealed that she requested he meet her halfway so that she could have part of the walk to herself. More on that in a moment. Allegedly, Meghan was frustrated or perhaps even upset that the whole week leading up to her wedding, all the press was focusing on was her father interviewing Samantha, talking about this family drama rather than talking about the preparations for the wedding or talking about her and Harry and things like that. The rumors were that she felt like if she wasn't getting interviewed, they shouldn't be getting interviewed. This whole thing seemed really fishy to a lot of people. Some of the main or most common reactions from the public to all of this family drama were that there was a lot of quick back and forth and vague declarations. There was lots of press and lots of speaking out and lots of statements. And for many people, having a news agency reach out to get pictures or give an interview would be perhaps exciting in some way, and regardless of what is said, it can still be a risk, as the media likes to pull sensationalist headlines and clickbait anywhere they can. So a lot of people thought that the Markle family speaking out, speaking to press, giving interviews, and the whole picture scandal was in poor taste and did fault the Markles for it. However, some people take Thomas Markle's side in regards to the picture scandal and say that they were innocent enough, they didn't cause any harm, and they weren't stirring the pot. There was no drama involved in showing that he was preparing to go to the wedding. But yet some still argue that it was distasteful because he may have been paid for them. He may have gotten financial gain, which is kind of like merching off the proximity to someone in a position of high celebrity or status. It is certainly tacky, as we have seen with Meghan Markle, to call the paparazzi to let them know where you're going to be. And one could argue that what Thomas was doing in that situation was no different than what Meghan does when she calls the paparazzi to have them come take pictures of her wherever she may be, walking in a parking lot, wherever it may be. The whole having Charles meet halfway thing didn't sit right for many, because it was seen as sort of disrespectful to his offer to walk her down the aisle, and there were some reports that Harry, upon learning that Thomas definitely wasn't going to come, when Meghan told him, Harry then contacted Charles to ask him if he would offer to walk Meghan down the aisle, and then Meghan was frustrated that Harry didn't run that by her first, because at that point, she was actually maybe looking forward to or would have preferred to just walk herself down the aisle and wanted to do it herself. So the rumor is that she was allegedly frustrated that Harry went around her to ask Prince Charles if he would do this favor, because she didn't actually want anybody to walk her down the aisle. But Harry, of course, was well-intentioned, thinking that he was trying to fix the issue and help to solve a problem. I do not know which version is true, if it was just Charles on his own accord reaching out, or if it was Harry calling him up and asking him, but both versions have been reported. The public was quite split on the Markle family drama. There were some people that thought the whole speaking out to the press, the pictures, the back and forth was perhaps the sign of family dysfunction. And many were hesitant to place blame on Meghan Markle at that point because there was a lack of other information at that time. She was not a well-known person. There were not some mountain of evidence in regards to her character at that point either way. So there were a lot of people who thought perhaps Samantha and Thomas were being manipulative or perhaps crossing boundaries. And it is reasonable for someone who is in or entering into the public eye to require or expect their family and close contacts to be discreet, obviously. And many people saw the Markle family actions as far from discreet. However, the other half of the public, their other take on it was that Meghan was not keen to have her family in the limelight at all. Perhaps she was not feeling very proud of them, that they would not be able to present themselves in the way that she wanted. Some people have pointed to and drawn parallels to people who are high in narcissism, who value appearances too highly and judge others' appearances with little compassion. And I'm just quoting commentary here. This is not my words. People thought that perhaps because Thomas was overweight, perhaps might look a bit scruffy or a rather casual fellow, and Samantha is a bit outspoken and perhaps less polished, they were not going to be able to meet Meghan Markle's standards of her vision for that idea of that day, let alone for walking her down the aisle, but to even be present at all, due to some of those other like high in narcissism sorts of signs that people had seen in Meghan Markle's behaviors. This theory was circulating heavily online at the time, that Meghan was actually quite pleased that neither of them were coming. She did not want them present for whatever reason. The third sort of element to it was that she simply had told many a tall tale about things like her history, who paid for her college, things of that nature. And she didn't want her family of origin present, undermining the stories that she told and perhaps giving conflicting accounts of her childhood or things like that. She didn't want that sticky situation to occur either. And the problem overall, whichever side you were on at the time or would take now on the issue, the problem with that family drama getting into the press at all is that it spurred on this exact speculation. Because these are just two of the most popular narratives that were circulating around the time, and none of that would be ideal. So let me know what your take on the whole Markle family and walking down the aisle drama or issue is. But the second main issue that we could point to as a controversy for the Markle wedding day was events that happened on the actual wedding day itself. The guest list, beyond the lone family member she invited, was simply inviting celebrities who were total strangers to her. I could see, especially with a wedding of this scale, inviting a handful of people who you do not know, but certainly not to this extent. There were a huge amount of guests who she had never met. Some people didn't even come. Like, for example, Reese Witherspoon said, "Why would I go? I don't even know them." It came across really poorly in the media because it seemed like a combination of social climbing and this sort of empty like flex attempt of like, look who came to my wedding, no matter if I know them or not. It also signaled to many that Meghan Markle had very few acquaintances, let alone real friends, who were on good terms. I personally wasn't alarmed at that alone, but paired up with the fact that there was tons and tons of celebrities, it was a bit weird. Because many people have small circles of friends, and you gotta fill the seats somehow. But that in turn would indicate, well, if your guest list is really small because you keep a very close, tight-knit group of friends, then why have the huge, extravagant wedding? More on that in a moment. Because regardless, filling the seats with strangers is just gonna look weird no matter how high profile you are. This quote caused a lot of people to raise their eyebrows because it sounded very much like Meghan was ready to discard everyone she previously knew, which sounds super toxic. There is no way around it. It's a quote. Multiple unnamed sources claimed that some of the Suits cast will attend Markle and Harry's wedding service and lunchtime reception. However, according to these sources, Markle's former co-stars were not invited to the couple's intimate nighttime reception at Frogmore House. The cast is important to her, but she has a new inner circle of friends. The afternoon reception is for Meghan and Harry's old circle, and the evening establishes their new circle. Well, I suppose when you found out whether you were invited to the evening or lunchtime reception, you learned which circle of friends you were in and whether or not you were to be discarded at that point. How awkward. And this came out before the wedding. So that means everybody who had those invitations were like, oh, I guess I'm the old circle of friends and this is the last time I'm going to speak to her, I guess. How awkward and terrible. But also a super weird concept, and super presumptuous as well. Like, the strangers who were invited to the wedding and perhaps the evening reception were now just going to become fast friends? Why? Someone tell Prince Harry and Meghan, that is not how friendship works. Her appearance on the wedding day also caused a bit of a stir. Some people point to that as some signs of disrespect and things of that nature. There were several requests or statements put out by the palace, by sources close to the Queen, for example. She shouldn't wear a veil. She shouldn't wear white, stuff like that, because it wasn't her first wedding. Despite it being Prince Harry's first wedding and it being her first religious wedding, it still was seen as a bit disrespectful to some, but we dive into her wedding dress and the specific problems with her wedding dress in terms to how it flattered her or didn't in the Royal Brides Fashion Edition. So I will link it for you if it's already up. If not, be sure to subscribe because it will be coming up this week. The point is that her wedding look people found to be disrespectful to either the Queen and or the church. Furthermore, the general scope of this wedding was humongous. It cost $45 million. Huge. $45 million. And a huge chunk of that was dedicated to security for the Windsor wedding, which was taxpayer funded. Safety protocol, which likely included rooftop snipers, undercover police in the streets, a counter UAV system, which deactivates intruder and paparazzi drones, and a drone destroyer. Oh. According to sources, the majority of that $45 million was spent on such security measures, and all of that was taxpayer funded. The parts of the wedding that were privately funded or privately paid for by any member of the royal family included things like the Givenchy haute couture wedding gown and the actual like party stuff. So for example, a luxury wedding planner named Amy Dunn had been interviewed to give estimates on how much this sort of a wedding was costing and where the money was going. And her estimates were that food and beverage could be $680,000. The glass marquee for the reception could be $400,000. And the flowers could be as much as $130,000. She also predicted $470,000 for the venue, $22,000 for photography and videography, $67,000 for cake, $27,000 for stationery, $400,000 for music, $175,000 for decorations, $8,000 for wedding rings, around $2,300 for bridesmaid and pageboy outfits, a tiny $235,000 for St. George's Chapel church fees. They probably deserve more than that. Over $10,000 for the groom's uniform, over $13,000 for hair and makeup, $74,000 for entertainment, over $4,000 for wedding favors, and over $160,000 for the honeymoon. These such expenses would mostly, if not all, been paid for by the royals themselves rather than taxpayer the way security was. Even still, many found that quite disagreeable because it was also Meghan's second wedding, perhaps third marriage, and again, that is still a huge chunk of the expense paid for by the taxpayers. Many people say that Harry is the son of a king and it was his first wedding, so he deserved all the pomp and circumstance and to have a huge wedding similar to that of Prince William. Yet, I would like to point out that, for example, Princess Beatrice had her first wedding very, very small and modest as granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II. Prince Harry at the time was grandson of Queen Elizabeth II. And Harry was no longer the spare at the time of his engagement and wedding. Prince William's 3 children had all already been born by the time the wedding took place. Harry was like 6th in line to the throne when he got married. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on that. The wedding reception also raised eyebrows, in part because of Meghan's speech. Now, it's not tradition for the bride to give a speech, at least not for British royal weddings. But I don't think that would have raised eyebrows so much as what she said. I think that what she said, you will find quite cringy, so be prepared. This is a direct quote from the Meg. On to the crux of why I wanted to speak tonight. First of all, it's been a while, she begins, and she has since said that got a big laugh, which I don't understand. That's not really a joke, that it's been a while. Is that a joke? I don't know. I don't believe it. I don't think anybody would have laughed at that, but moving on. But mostly I wanted to share a story that I wrote about the man that I love and the way that we met. Let's call this a modern fairy tale. She described the different worlds they came from and perhaps how their relationship was portrayed in the press by saying, once upon a time there was a girl from LA, some people called her an actress, and there was a boy from London, some people called him a prince. All of those people didn't fully get it because this is the love story of a boy and girl who were meant to be together. It is super cringy to be in your mid to late 30s and calling each other boy and girl, first off. Second off, all of those people just don't get it. They just don't get us. It sounds like a teenager. It really gave a juvenile sort of a vibe, and it's one of those things that fed into the idea that she is higher in narcissism, not seeing how that would come across. And still, I don't think anybody would have minded her speech if it had different content, if it was a little bit less questionable. But this leads me to the fourth aspect of the wedding controversy. The comments Harry and Meghan made later. Years later, on Oprah, Meghan and Harry dismissed the wedding as something that was thrust upon them, that they didn't even want it. They called it a spectacle in a bad way. They were told they must have this big wedding, as if it was unpleasant, which was an insult to that taxpayer-funded like $40 million security bill that the British public paid for. But that's not even the whole story. When the engagement was first announced, it was reported that the Queen was suggesting a smaller wedding and that it was even like there was a statement or sources close to the royal family said that the wedding was going to be a smaller affair, that they were going to have a low-key, more down-to-earth wedding. And it was widely reported at the time after the engagement that they were not gearing up for a massive scale wedding. They already had Princess Eugenie's wedding in plans for the same year that Harry and Meghan were going to marry, and that was going to be a fairly large wedding, not quite as big as Prince William and Catherine's, obviously, but still pretty big. And that Harry and Meghan, it being her second wedding, them being kind of this different vibe, sort of a couple, that they were talking about a smaller wedding. This was coming from palace sources, not sources close to the couple the way we hear it cited when it's coming from Harry and Meghan. If it's coming from Harry and Meghan, if it's coming from Team Sussex, it's sources close to the couple. And so these were statements coming from the palace sources telling people it's not going to be like a huge wedding. It'll be a wedding, but it'll be more like a private wedding. More similar to perhaps what King Charles and Queen Camilla had, or perhaps just something a little bit more intimate. And I'm keeping my opinion out of this. The theory that was out there was that Harry and Meghan didn't like decisions being made for them. For example, everyone involved except Harry and Meghan were on the same page that a smaller affair would be best and most suitable, but Harry and Meghan wanted something bigger, or perhaps despite the fact that people were kind of already being like, well, yeah, it's going to be a smaller wedding. They thought, well, you don't get to pick that. We're going to pick a big wedding because you thought we were going to have a small wedding. Surprise, we're going to ask for a big wedding. I'm not giving my opinion on it. Leave yours in the comments. I would like to know which you think is true. The point is that Harry and Meghan were the ones who pushed to have a wedding similar to that of William and Catherine's. Harry especially, perhaps Meghan too, but had specifically asked to marry in the same venue as Prince William had. Another example of these decisions being made for them was that William broke protocol by having a best man with Harry. And so it was decided, or rather assumed, that Harry would do the same and have William as his best man. But Harry didn't necessarily pick that for himself. It was just sort of assumed and would have been the done thing, the polite thing to do. Big weddings like this, especially of the royal sort, are very much protocol bound as they become part of history, part of culture, and they are witnessed by like everybody. You have millions of people watching this, you have hundreds of thousands of people wanting to see it, and thousands of people involved to make it happen. And the monarch, as a symbol of British culture, is always striving to set a good example in all areas, and thus would need a royal wedding under that monarch to be conducted in a certain way, with a certain level of good moral standing involved, including polite measures like having William be best man because Harry was best man for William. Those types of things would kind of need to happen so as to not stir up weird appearances. And so the wedding planning process likely began with an entire team of planners who had consulted the Queen, the history, and the protocol, and who knew very well the etiquette which created the framework for the event. And then this team, with their framework in place, would then come to Harry and Meghan to see as many of their requests that they could fit in and to give them choices of what sorts of things they would like within that framework, which meant much less control for the bride and groom themselves, but it also meant a royal wedding, a historically significant one, and of course, the best of the best, and a lot of help too. So although it might not be everything exactly as they wanted, it was going to be spectacular in so many ways that most people would think it outweighs it. Wedding of that scope requires a really large team, and honestly, having the pressure off would mean you're not choosing every single last thing, and it may not be every single thing you'd like it or how you would choose it, but it's still amazing and wonderful and special and massive. And a person in that situation could reason that they could plan, for example, their vow renewals themselves and have that sort of intimate vibe then and do things exactly how they want then in 5 years or 10 years. But regardless, it turns out, if you believe the sources, that Harry and Meghan were the ones who pushed for the big wedding event and then later dissed it and kind of rejected it as something they didn't even want anyway, which is just plain rude. These statements weren't just in poor taste, they came off as really ungrateful, which will never be a good look and is yet another reason why people think the wedding is one of those big moments, turning points in terms of public opinion and the Sussex couple. Furthermore, on Oprah, she claimed that she and Harry had wed beforehand. This lie put other people at risk. The Archbishop Justin Welby had to deny this because a marriage requires at least 2 witnesses in the UK, and if what Meghan and Harry had said on Oprah was true, then the Archbishop would have been committing a crime, and his reputation was implicated as well in that. This is a very careless thing to do on the part of Meg and Harry, and it was unfair to put Mr. Welby in such a precarious position. The last element has to do with all of the arguments and infighting that was going on involving the wedding itself. And we're going to get into a set of several of the very specific arguments that have the most amount of sources to back them up as the most reliable facts we can get, the closest we can get to cold hard evidence in this sort of a situation. There are more issues than this and more arguments that occurred and swirled around this event, but these are the most reliable. Stories were corroborated and reported by reliable witnesses or reliable sources. Over time, Harry and the Meg have, on some occasions, come out with their own versions of these things, which were rather unwelcome given it was several years later, and it made it look like they were really keen to just stir up the drama again, but we'll get into that in a moment. I will preface this segment with this note, that obviously these are stories and reports where only the eyewitnesses and direct individuals involved would know the actual whole truth. Sometimes there are 2 sides to a story, but not always. When you look at an individual story or 2, you could think, okay, benefit of the doubt should be given here. We don't know what really happened. We weren't there. But when you look at this pattern of several of these stories and several of these arguments all together, it really paints a picture of somebody's questionable character, somebody who is less than cooperative, less than pleasant to deal with, perhaps very difficult. Because while it is beneficial to consider the other side and give that benefit of the doubt where it's due, for example, something might be taken out of context or exaggerated, or perhaps there were other events preceding it, this set of alleged arguments really add up. Is it reasonable to think that one person would have several separate incidents and sometimes completely unrelated sources with drama to report involving just one individual? That several groups would skew a narrative on their own several times this early on in the saga? Or is it perhaps more reasonable to think that there is one common denominator, which is the individual? Taking all these stories combined, draw a logical conclusion that this person, at the very least, is perhaps difficult. First, we have Tiara-gate. The short version is that Meghan wanted the emerald tiara Princess Eugenie had already chosen for her wedding, which had already begun the planning stages before the Megs began. Meghan wasn't just displeased by this, Harry was also furious with the Queen's staff. He had some pent-up grudges, and as we discussed, the couple may have been getting prickly over their choice of a big public wedding, some things being predetermined or required or planned for you. So regardless, it came off as very poor taste and rather hostile, the whole what the Meg wants, the Meg gets thing. And for most, it was thought that if you would bristle at the thought of having to pick a different, spectacular, priceless tiara, shows poor character. Later, Harry revealed that they actually really wanted the Spencer tiara at first, so much so that the Meg had already begun planning her wedding look around the Spencer tiara, having not yet even tried it on or gotten permission. She was already designing her veil around the Spencer tiara. But the use of this tiara was denied by the Spencer family because it's reserved for born Spencer women. When the Meg and Harry had chosen the bandeau she ended up wearing, there was drama over trying it on, which Harry blames Angela Kelley for and goes to great lengths to make her seem extremely unpleasant. But perhaps the icy mood stemmed from the tantrum initially had over which tiara they were going to get in the first place. Taking a privilege for granted tends to create tension. The next point of argument came with wedding gifts. A press release was issued that all gifts must go through Kensington Palace, not brought or sent to Windsor, because royals cannot accept gifts that may later make them or give the appearance of being beholden to any companies or parties. The staff sifted through the gifts essentially, and over £7 million worth of gifts, or nearly $9 million worth of gifts, were returned on this basis, which is protocol. This allegedly didn't sit too well with Meghan in particular. Harry, of course, had witnessed this exact thing happen with Prince William's wedding and knew the rules and protocol much better than Meghan. He was used to having staff handling many aspects of his life at that point. But the Meg did not take kindly to this. at all. I can understand, especially that big of a number, being a little bit like a, oh my goodness moment, but again, it's a trade-off. You must keep perspective with these things. She had her entire wedding paid for. It was ginormous. She was joining a significant institution and culture. She was becoming part of history. She had all of these other things that for most people would have vastly outweighed getting to keep some presents. The next and perhaps most sensational of things came with the bridesmaids' dresses and protocol. A few months after the wedding, the bridesmaids' dress story hit the press. Meghan had made Catherine cry, and this came on the heels of Tiara-gate, so here Meg was dubbed Duchess Difficult. The story was that she opposed to the girls wearing tights, which was a foolish hill to die on, because the tights would help their shoes be more comfortable, and we're talking little kids here, under age 10. I mean, come on. Also, the dresses were ginormous and they all needed to be remade. They had to have fittings and scramble to get this done right before the wedding happened. It was stressful for all, including the parents of these little bridesmaids, these little flower girls. The moms of the girls were just trying to protect their children from discomfort. Wearing these new little shoes without tights would have been decidedly less comfortable for the girls. The moms are also trying to achieve something presentable. Little kids have fantastic imaginations and are very creative, so I could imagine the moms already had to have many a discussion with their little ones, because they were all under the age of 10, that they don't get to pick out the dress, they don't get to pick out the stuff, but they do get to do this, and it is going to be fun, and it's going to be a pretty dress, and it's going to be awesome. So they've already had to do a lot of the legwork. Meghan should not have gotten in the way of the tights. That was super silly. She did not have children at that point. She had zero concept of how children operate and what children really need. So this did not go over well in any way, shape, or form. But it also is directly connected to the who made who cry drama involving Princess Catherine and Meghan. Several years on from this happening, on Oprah, Meghan thinks this is a great opportunity to rehash the drama. She drudged this up from the bottom of the lake to say, no, it is the other way around. Now, why would you bring up this old drama like that? I think Meghan thought she would be getting people on her side by telling her version of the story, but part of the problem was that she had already lied so much that she wasn't a very reliable source to give a different version of the events. People already were like, well, you're lying about all these other things. Why should we believe you about this? But it also made her look like a drama-loving human who really wanted to marinate in this discourse yet again. And it also made her look like she was baiting, something toxic people tend to do. They'll try to goad you into a fight or try to get into a war of words with you. And in this case, it looked like she was trying to get the palace or Catherine, Princess of Wales, and people on her behalf to get into a war of statements over this issue, which is super petty and small. It really brought no value to the situation. It's such a redundant and small problem. Also, how could Meghan know she didn't make Catherine cry? I, for one, do not announce it when I have cried. That seems so silly and juvenile. Why announce that you're crying over something? So the point is, there's no way to actually know whether or not you made someone else cry, which further discredits Meghan Markle's claim that actually, no, I didn't make her cry, she made me cry, rather than I was also emotional and upset over this. I do not know whether she cried or not, but it wasn't in front of me. However, I can tell you I did cry. Like, that would be more believable than just, no, I definitely didn't make her cry. I know for a fact she didn't shed a tear. So, given that it's not even possible for Meghan to know this, why say it on Oprah? It ended up looking really, really petty and doing even more damage to Meghan Markle's reputation at that point. Also, Meghan could have taken a much more practical approach, something less specific. Like, there were several stories that we all knew were false, and I found it really difficult to accept that they were not corrected by the palace. It upset me to have lies out in the press. And she could even have said, I won't go into specific stories because that's not the point. The point is, and what upset me was that in the moment, the stories were not corrected or stopped when I felt they should have been. That sort of an approach, or like a statement, would have been something people could sympathize with. And it would have been much more professional. It wouldn't have stirred the pot or exacerbated dramas between the parties at all. It wouldn't have made things worse between her and Catherine, or her and the royal family, or Harry and the royal family. It wouldn't have done any of that. It would have kept it very much in her lane of like, I was upset that stories were out there that were not true. Whether or not they actually were true is aside from the point. if she would have taken the approach of saying it in this way, it would have come across so much better and worked in her favor. So it blows my mind that repeatedly Harry and Meghan choose the route that makes them look worse rather than the route that could still accomplish what seems to be their goal without making them look petty. I genuinely believe people would have viewed that sort of approach much more sympathetically than the approach that Meghan took, which seemed more like trying to pick on people or settle petty scores than say that, oh, well, this is something that bothered me, and the root issue is that there were false stories and I felt like nobody cared to correct it. That's not what she did or what she said, which also gives fuel to the idea that many of these stories were actually true indeed. Harry also doubles down, again, years later, in Spare. So we go years from the actual wedding and this drama happening to Oprah, and it's rehashed by Harry and Meghan. And we go years again, and it's rehashed in Spare. Blows my mind. He gives another unreliable version of the problems. It's clear he cherry-picks information in this section of the book. He shares private conversations which may or may not have actually occurred. And once again, he looks like he's stirring up the drama. Did he really see this pre-wedding spat as the biggest problem that they all dealt with? So much so that it must continually be revisited and rehashed? If so, I would argue that shows Harry and Meghan's problems are even smaller and more trivial than we have ever previously thought. Because if the bridesmaids or flower girl dresses and sister-in-law tears are this big of a talking point and this big of a deal to Harry and Meghan, then surely that must be one of the biggest fish they have to fry, which makes them look all the more petty and small. There were more drama in the press, there were more things circulating through gossip items, of course, but these were the biggest stories of the time. And most people point to one or more of these 5 controversies to the Sussex wedding as the moment they soured on the Meg and or Harry, as the time they started to question the benefit of the doubt being given to Meghan. Many people still do not understand why so many people don't like Harry and Meghan or why they're not very well received by the public. And this wedding, these events surrounding it, the continuing on of the drama in later projects over petty little problems, are one of the biggest reasons people saw red flags. Some as early as the engagement. If you missed engagement week, I will link that video here for you. But other people took a little bit longer, and the wedding was kind of the next big thing that kind of changed perception for a big percentage of people. But what do you think? Please leave it in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye!